Okay, good evening, gentlemen. We are holding in the middle of the Chassidic Rebbe of Lubavitch, his Maimer Naaseh, his discourse describing how we make a dwelling place within our hearts for the faith that each and every Jew has within their soul. And we've explained that to make that little dwelling place, you have to furnish it. The first piece of furniture is the bed. The bed is the reckoning that we make at night about how the past day was not lived for godliness as much as it should have been. Tomorrow is going to be completely different. Then we wake up and we have something called a heidah, an acknowledgement, where the animal soul is in a position that even though it doesn't understand God, it can at least admit that it itself is not God. Right? That's the first step. It itself can admit that it is not the source of its own life, that it should be thankful that it has life this morning. We take that acknowledgement to the beginning of Shacharis, which just like Meideh Ani, that initial acknowledgement, the first word of Shacharis is Hodu, which has the same root, which is an acknowledgement mixed with praise. And then we begin the first part of davening, which is the davening until the Shema. Psukei de Zimra and Birchas Kriya Shema, essentially from Baruch Sha'amar until the Shema in the morning. This is a praise of Hashem, and the whole purpose of this part of davening is, as we explained last week, it is the table. This part of davening is not the bed. The bed was what we did at night. In the morning, we have the table. Why is it called the table? Right? Why is it called the table? It's called the table. I don't know if we read this inside last time. If we didn't, then we're about to read it. It's called the table because you take a big old animal, right? And you use the animal for a good purpose. Now, at your dinner table, take the animal and you use him for a purpose. The purpose is eating and getting sustenance and being healthy, being able to serve God with health, right? Very similarly, the table, which is Psukei de Zimra and Birchas Kriya Shema, this part of the morning davening, the table is when you take the animal within, the animal soul, and you use him for godliness. It is the part of davening where we take the power that the animal soul has. As we discussed last week, the animal soul is warm. It has a push, it has a want and a push. It has a desire, it has deep desires, passion, things that it wants. We can take that passion, we can harness it for godliness. And it's a two-step process. The first step of the process, what are the two steps? The two steps we called the chakika mibechutz and the chakika mibifnim. There is the carving from the outside and the carving from the inside, right? If you have a big block of wood and you want to make a cup out of it, first you have to carve out the piece of the wood that you're going to turn into the cup. You carve it out from the outside, and then you carve out the inside and actually turn it into a vessel, which are what are the two steps? The two steps are, number one, we show the animal soul that all the things that it loves have a connection to godliness and are rooted in godliness, which is what the Psukei de Zimra is, right? We tell it that look at the beautiful mountains and look at the beautiful snow and look at all of the beautiful things in life. Look at your own parnasa, your own livelihood, your own sustenance. All of these things, what are they all expressions of? They're all expressions of godliness. They all reflect a godly reality, right? Then, the next step is the Birchas Kriya Shema, where we tell the animal that, in fact, there are these things called angels. And angels are the supernal animal. The angels are the source of all the animals down here below, including you, we tell the animal soul. Your spiritual source. You yourself, where do you come from? You come from a place of godliness and holiness. And what happens when something meets its source, truly meets its source? It ceases to be independent. It loses its independent reality, right? The animal soul is introduced to the godliness from which it's derived, and then the animal soul says, I'm no longer an independent being. I'm a being that belongs to and is an expression of God. I've been reconnected with my own source in godliness, right? And once this takes place, we can use the power of the animal soul for holy purposes. That's why this part of davening is called the table. The table is, you bring the big piece of meat, and you take it from something that was once an animal, a living animal, with no particular role in the highest godly plans, right? You take it and you use it in holiness. You turn the animal into a being of holiness. That's what your table is for. That's what the table is. And we do this in the morning part of davening. Now, at the end of last week, we talked a lot about the nature of the animal soul, and I said we'd continue next week, so let's continue this week. I am on page 332. I am 5 lines down at the bottom of, from the top of the page. 5 lines down from the top of the page, end of the line. Page 332, 5 lines down. Dehine. We read this already, but we're going to read it again. Dehine hanefesh habahamis hukeach hamisave. The animal soul is fundamentally what, right? Now, you have to understand, the answer to this question has to cover 2 bases, because you're taking, the animal soul is something that by nature is not interested in godliness, and we're saying that the whole goal of davening is to educate that animal soul and transform it and make it into a godly thing. So whatever the animal soul is, it has to be able to be expressed in both forms. You understand what I'm saying? In other words, if we say, I don't know, what's a good example? If we say that if we say it was just President's Day, right? So you ask, what is George Washington? Who is George Washington? So the answer has to be something that applies to all of his roles, right? What George Washington is has to be a person who could be both a general and a president, right? And a participant in the Constitutional Convention, etc., etc. He has to be a husband and a slave owner and all the different things that he was. So you have to have a person who fulfills, right? That's who he is, right? Because who he is was involved in every single one of those different occupations, right? So when we ask what is the animal soul, the answer has to be something that can be both holy and non-holy, right? It has to be something that can be for God and for itself. So what does the Chassidic Rebbes say? Chassidic Rebbes says, what is the nefesh habahamis? The nefesh habahamis is a keach hamisave, right? Which he translates in Yiddish, a keach vas will. It is a power or a potential that wants, it desires. That is what the animal soul is. The animal soul at its root is a desire. We discussed last week that wanting for all finite beings, including the animal soul, it's a bit different when we say God wants. God wants is a special case. But for all finite beings, right, wanting means wanting because you lack. You only want something if you don't have it. The 2 things are fundamentally related. If you have it, you don't want it, right? You have it. Doesn't mean you don't want it like you want to get rid of it, right? But you don't desire it. There is no, in other words, a person who has everything never moves. There's no reason to go anywhere. There's no reason to get out of bed in the morning, which is why it's so difficult for some of us. Until, right, you're lying in bed in the morning, it's nice and warm, it's cold and rainy in Atlanta. Everyone wants to, they're bothering you at work. It's so annoying. Everybody's so annoying. You're lying here in bed, it's so warm, it's so nice. Shulchan Aruch talks about this, by the way. It says this is what the evil inclination tells you to try and prevent you from getting out of bed, right?
The only thing, no one has everything.
Right? So that's the thing. The thing is that for 5 minutes you can convince yourself, I have everything, I never need to get out of this bed. But then something comes along and all of a sudden you want something, right? You're not fully satisfied. Something is wrong in one way or another. We don't need to get into details. Something comes along and there's a reason that you have to get out of bed. There's something that is not fulfilled. You're no longer fully satisfied. Right? Wanting for finite beings means you want because you lack. In other words, we only want because we are finite, right? Wanting is very much part of being a non-infinite being, which is why it's so incredible that God wanted to create the world, for example, or create a universe, because if God doesn't need anything and God is fully has a fullness of being and fully self-possessed, and him by just existing is a perfect and infinite being as he is, right? It's very difficult for us to understand as finite beings why he would want to do anything, right? God theoretically is like the being who is always perfectly in bed and nothing ever comes along and bothers him to get out. What does he need? What does he need anything for? He doesn't need anything. He's God, right?
Yeah, is it a want or a need?
What? In this description, the 2 things are related. It's not a. This is not the. There is a distinction, but that distinction is not, I think, It's not germane here. It's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the power that wants, right? What is when we say want, that I think actually it's a good question, Darrell, because that lets me bring out the next point. The next point is that when we say the animal soul is a power that wants, we are not talking again about a psychological process. You have to learn this when you learn Chassidus, especially when you learn about Chassidus as it describes human beings. Everything Chassidus says about the human being is true at a psychological level, but everything Chassidus says is true psychologically is rooted in an existential level. In other words, it's not just because we feel this way, right? Because then it's just a feeling, so who cares, right? The animal soul feels like it wants, so maybe it needs to go to therapy, right? So when Chassidus says the animal soul wants, it doesn't mean that therapy can rub this away. It means that the animal soul, by dint of being what it is, by the way God creates it, by its metaphysical structure, its spiritual nature, right? That is why it wants. The fundamental reality of the animal soul is that it's something that wants. Why? Because it's finite and incomplete. By definition, God creates it in a way that it is not a complete being, it's not a whole being. It's a being that constantly wants things outside of itself, as we discussed last week. The Eifen Hatayve Shaloi, continues the Friedrich Rebbe, and what is the way that it wants? Sein Willen, the nature of its will, hu bekeach gadol, is to be with great strength. Right? What's the metaphor brought elsewhere in Chassidus? The animal soul is like an ox, right? It's a big, powerful animal, right? As compared to the godly soul, which is compared to a small human child, right? The animal soul is a big, powerful animal. The godly soul is a small human child, right? The animal soul wants with a power that the godly soul does not have. It has a lot of power that even the godly soul does not possess. Why? Because the godly soul does not want as much as the animal soul does. The animal soul, by dint of being disconnected, finite, right, atomized, alone, self-contained, right, all of that means it's extremely limited. And to fill all of that limitation, to fill that inner void, it has an incredible desire, an incredible amount of power that it wants what it wants, whatever it may be. And some of the wants are very physical, some of the wants are very spiritual, right? People want knowledge, people want recognition, people want honor, people want to be understood, right? There's all sorts of things that the animal soul wants, right? But the common denominator is that it wants it very powerfully. In a way, it's much more powerful than the godly soul's wanting. Why? Because the godly soul is in a state of satisfaction before God, as a rule, right? The truth is it's more complicated than this, because the godly soul's satisfaction is not a fully static state. The godly soul constantly desires not to exist, to be further included within godliness, as explained in Tanya. So there is a part of you, but there is a part of you that in worldly terms at least, right, in finite realities, when not talking about God, the godly soul is perfectly satisfied. The godly soul, generally speaking, doesn't want any of these finite things. The godly soul is happy, it's not anxious, right? It's relaxed, it's satisfied, it's not in a rush to go anywhere. Why? Because it's constantly aware of the reality of God, and God is all it cares about. God doesn't change, so why should it be running anywhere? God is there as much as God is here, right? It's a very godly soul perspective.
Don't exactly tire.
Sorry?
That it doesn't exactly tire.
What do you mean?
You take somebody who's religious.
Yeah.
Okay, if they don't get up in the morning and go to minyan.
Yeah.
Okay.
A religious
Now,
person...
That's not according to you. You've been saying
No, but we're not talking about a religious person. I'm talking about an unreligious person. I only talk about unreligious. I don't know anything about religious
I'm
people.
not saying. I'm just using it broadly.
Yeah.
Say that religious person would want to go to shul.
Right.
And they're
Right.
feeling guilty.
Right. Well,
Okay,
yeah, but the
that's
thing
not
is,
the animal soul. Is the animal soul?
what do you mean? The animal soul is the one that feels guilty.
Absolutely.
The animal soul is certainly the one that feels guilty. Absolutely. There's no question. The godly soul is not conflicted about doing mitzvahs, right? And not only that, but the godly soul finds godliness within not just mitzvahs, but within all the realities of life. The godly soul in general, as a feel, is much more content, happy, relaxed, and totally, totally equanimical towards finite things, right? One way or the other, it doesn't care. It's how the Baal Shem Tov describes it in Savas Harivash, in the famous Will and Testament of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov there writes that the state of the tzaddik, the state that the tzaddik attains, is a state of perfect hashva'ut. Hashva'ut in Hebrew. In English, equanimity. Equanimity in English, right? Hashva'ut comes from shaveh. Everything is equal. Everything is the same. A bad day at work, good day at work. Good food, bad food. Comfortable bed, uncomfortable bed. Godly soul doesn't care, right? It's all about godliness. God is a constant. God is everywhere. That's godly soul, right? Animal soul, forget about it. Animal soul needs this, it needs that. It wants this, it wants that. Anxious, didn't get this, didn't get respect, didn't get understood, didn't get the recognition, didn't get this. Uncomfortable bed, bad food, right? Everything is, why? Because it's dealing in finite realities, right? Why should it attain satisfaction in every situation? Every situation has to be judged by its finite definition, right? The bed only has a certain amount of comfort in it. It could be more comfortable, right?
The line is very delicate because the godly soul actually wants to.
That's what I said. Yeah, it wants more of an experience of godliness, but there's a difference between. It's like the comparison between living now and living in Mashiach's times, right? Will there be peace when Mashiach comes? The answer is yes and no. On the one hand, no, because we're going to constantly want to be moving upwards in godliness. But on the other hand, obviously yes, because in comparison to how we live now, right? Obviously, it's a state of perfect peace, right? It's the same with the godly soul. The godly soul is never at rest, but the way it's never at rest is infinitely more at rest than the animal soul's life.
So who wants to be elevated, the godly soul or the nefesh b'emet?
Both. They both want to be elevated, each on their own terms.
And who is getting the benefit out of?
Out of which?
Of learning and enjoying the learning.
Both. It's complicated. Again, we had this discussion last week, I recall. It's complicated. Let's talk about it more in a minute. So, I was actually reminded of something the Chassidic Rebbes says elsewhere. I forget where I read this or if I heard it from someone. The Chassidic Rebbes says somewhere else in his talks that the animal soul, so what can the animal soul be compared? The animal soul can be compared to a hog that's lying in its own filth, right? And the hog is very, very happy lying in its own filth, right? And it lies in its own filth, and its own filth is up to here, right? And the animal soul is such a thing that all of its life strivings and all of its energy is that the filth should go from here to above the nostrils. That's all of its striving. That's what it wants, right? It's happy in its own filth, but it's over here, and all it wants is that the filth should, in other words, in full perspective, all of these strivings and all the things that the animal soul wants, what does it really want, in other words? But it's a different discussion, a sharp teaching from the Chassidic Rebbes. Anyway, the animal soul, what is it? For good or for bad? In other words, for godliness or for non-godliness, what is it? It is a desire. A keach hamis'aveh, a taiva, a desire. Says the verse in Proverbs from King Solomon, wisest of all men, V'rav tvuos b'keach shor. Many grains are harvested by the power of an ox. Right? Umimenu sheba. Okay. Rav tvuos b'keach shor. In other words, this is what King Solomon says. Many grains are harvested by an ox. What is he talking about? He's talking about the animal soul. The animal soul, if used for holiness, is incredibly useful. You can harvest much more grain with an ox than you can by hand. The animal soul is a power of desire. All you have to do is take that power of desire and turn it away from the finite, the selfish, and the self-centered, and turn it towards godly things. Right? The Rebbe Rashab says this in a slightly different language at the beginning of Kuntras Umayan, which was once the topic of this class many eons ago. There the Rebbe Rashab says it in a slightly different language. He says man's whole purpose on earth is to constantly make more refined the things from which he derives pleasure. which is the same idea here, right? If today he derives pleasure from a more coarse thing, he should work tomorrow, that his pleasure should derive from a more and more refined thing, until even godly things, etc., etc. That's the purpose. So too here. The animal soul enjoys naturally coarse things, right? We discussed how even the spiritual things it appreciates become tainted by its own self-centeredness, right? What is the great advantage of the animal soul? Why do we have the animal soul at all? Because turning that animal soul to holiness is of an incredible benefit. It can do much more than even the godly soul can do. Like the ox, which can harvest a lot of grain. Continues the Chassidic Rebbe, Umimenu hu sheba yetzer hara. It is from the animal soul that the evil inclination arises. This is a very important distinction in Chassidus Chabad, in the teachings of the Alter Rebbe, right? Most Jewish ethical works, going back to the Talmud, but many, many others based on the Talmud as well, discuss the difference between an evil inclination and a good inclination, right? Which is, it's like the angel and the devil on the shoulder, right? The voice that says do the good thing, and the voice that says do the enjoyable thing, right? You have the two little voices, right? Comes the Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe says that's not the real distinction, for a number of reasons. For a number of reasons, that's not the real distinction. The real distinction is between godly soul, animal soul, right? The distinction is not good inclination, bad inclination. It's godly soul, animal soul. Among the differences between these two approaches, let's discuss some of the differences, right? The first difference is that a godly soul and an animal soul are two complete identities in one, right? In one person, right? Two complete identities in one person. In other words, it's not that there's one person in the middle and there's a temptation to good and a temptation to evil, right? There is actually a whole person within the individual that desires nothing but godliness, right? Which is an incredibly powerful statement, right? Because if it's just an inclination for godliness, how does that change your perspective if it's just an inclination for godliness? If it's just an inclination for godliness, what that means is that you essentially are not God. What part of you is godly? The part of you that's godly is one small voice that stands on one shoulder, right? The person who makes the decision is not godly, right? The feelings the person has are not godly. The godliness is just limited to that one voice, right? As opposed to, there is an entire godly soul within the person. There is a full intellect. There is a full emotion. There is a full abilities to take action, thought, speech, and action. All of these faculties are all godly. They all exist in a godly form within the person. Right? Just a different perspective. It's a different perspective on the extent to which there is a godly soul and a godly presence, a connection to God, a dvekus, a connection to godliness within the person. Another difference is that when you talk about good inclination and bad inclination, people tend to reduce these down to head versus heart, right? There's the thing that I know is the right thing to do, and then there's my desires, the desires of my heart, right? And that is the fundamental battle within the human being, is the battle between the head and the heart. The Alter Rebbe fundamentally disagrees. The Alter Rebbe says the fundamental battle is not head versus heart. Why? We've already answered it in this class, learning this mimer. We've already answered the question. Because sometimes the head is not really good, such as the mind of the animal soul, right? Sometimes the heart is pure, such as the love for God that the godly soul has, right? So that's not the dividing line, right? And furthermore, if you start thinking that your head is good just because you learned a little bit of what the right thing to do in Shulchan Aruch is, for example, right? You've made a terrible mistake, because how can you ever transform your heart, right, and educate it in the way we're discussing in this mimer, if you think that your head is always purely holy, right? In other words, you understand what I'm saying? In other words, the head itself, it's really a battle of head versus head. It's not a battle of head versus heart, right? If your head, if your godly mind can explain to your animal mind, right, that the source of the beauty you see is godliness, when you're davening, when you're praying Psukei de Zimra, right, that affects the emotions of your animal soul, and the whole animal soul can be elevated. But if you think that just your everyday thoughts, that you read an ethical principle in a book one time, and that means that your understanding of the ethical principle is godly, right, that'll never transform the animal soul, because again, the mind of the animal soul is also self-centered. The mind of the animal soul ultimately serves the emotions. So the distinction in Chassidus is between godly soul, animal soul. However, there's obviously, it says the Talmud discusses a concept of good inclination, evil inclination. So how does Chassidus explain good inclination, evil inclination? We have the same concept present in Chassidus. They are just not the primary bifurcation. They're not the primary battleground within the person. The primary battleground within the person is godly soul versus animal soul. There is something called a good inclination, and there's something called an evil inclination. And what these things are in Chassidus, the way they're most commonly explained in Chassidus, is the good inclination are the midos, are the emotions of the godly soul. The evil inclination are the natural midos, the natural emotions of the animal soul. The emotions of the godly soul are the treasure-trove, the good inclination. The emotions of the animal soul, in their natural state, are the evil inclination. Which is why the Chassidic Rebbes wrote here, it is from the animal soul that the evil inclination arises. Right? Why? In other words, you have a little devil on your shoulder which says, do the wrong thing, right? You don't talk to that guy, because that guy just comes from, you want to go to the boss. Where does that guy come from? Where does the voice come from? He comes from the animal soul. The thing is that this guy, the guy on your shoulder, the fundamental distinction in Chassidus, here's another one of the fundamental distinctions. The guy on your shoulder is evil. The animal soul, his organization that he comes from, is not evil, right? The organization he comes from is just, as we said before, it's a want. There's a being within me that is empty and it wants, right? That wanting gives rise to something which is called negative emotive traits, which means I naturally love and desire things that are evil, and I am fearful and I move away from things that are godly. Right? That's what the evil inclination is. So you don't have to argue with the guy who is actually evil on your shoulder, who says, do the evil thing, because all he is a manifestation of a deeper problem. He is a symptom, right? The guy on the shoulder is a symptom. He says, go eat the cheeseburger. But why does he say that? He says that because he is the natural desires, the totally natural, not unnatural, not evil from the devil, right? We have a very different view in Judaism. The totally natural reflection of a finite being with an inner emptiness that wants to satisfy itself. Right? And when it wants to satisfy itself, that desire is not limited by intellect, really. It's not limited by any higher cause, because it's totally self-defined in its finite limitation, right? It's totally self-centered, right? Its desires, which arise from the way God created it, are totally overwhelming to all intellect, and therefore it ends up wanting things that are bad and not rejecting things that are good. Right? So when you look at the guy speaking to you on your shoulder, don't talk to that guy. He's useless. He's not the source of the problem, and he's not going to change, because you're sitting there all day talking to yourself about why you shouldn't want to have a cheeseburger when you do, right? There's no talking to the little guy that wants to eat the cheeseburger. And we understand, of course, that the cheeseburger is a euphemism and a metaphor for whatever it is, right? So the guy on the shoulder wants the cheeseburger. So you tell the guy, you're irrelevant. We're not even going to talk to you. We're going to the boss. The boss says, listen, this is what I happen to want right now. Now I happen to want a cheeseburger. But the truth is that really anything that could satisfy my being, that could satisfy my want, really anything like that would satisfy me. The cheeseburger is just the thing that I settled on because that's what I understand. That reflects the way God made me for whatever reason. Right? So then you tell the animal soul, you call headquarters and you tell him, listen, you tell him every day, in Psukei de Zimra, you tell him, listen, you want cheeseburgers naturally, but where does the cheeseburger come from? The cheeseburger is an expression of God. Whatever goodness is in the cheeseburger is in God infinitely more. It has a source in godliness. It has a reason for being created, right? It comes from the animal kingdom. The animal kingdom is derivative of the angels, which are derivative of the divine chariot. And God created and emanated and expressed himself in all of these different functions in order that the vitality and the pleasure that you take in the cheeseburger should be expressed in this world. And you should just realize that the thing that you want, right, the thing that you want, the cheeseburger itself, is evil. But your desire for wanting it is not evil, because your desire for wanting is really godly. What do you really want? You don't want this ray of a diluted ray, a pale reflection of what a good meal is, right? You want an actual good meal. This finite thing cannot satisfy you. Let me show you something infinite, something that can satisfy you and will satisfy you, right? And in fact, your own source, your desire itself is not a bad thing. Where do you think desire itself comes from? Finitude itself, Yeshus, independent reality, self-centeredness itself has a holy source. Right? You yourself come from the angels, right? And what do? You take that animal, which had a very bad representative on your shoulder, and you turn him towards the good. So it's vital to understand that the Yetzer Hara, the bad things that the animal soul wants, are just the symptom. Right? They come from the animal soul. They're not the animal soul itself. The animal soul is a good thing. The animal soul is a godly thing. The animal soul is here, just like an ox is here, to serve human beings, to plow the field, right? To bring home the reward that you could never do yourself, right? The problem is that by itself, it's unable, it's lawless, it's undisciplined, and it doesn't know what's good for itself, right? It has no true ability to appreciate the good life. Everything that's good for it is infinite, and all of its intellect is finite, right? It's the way God made it. Everything that's good for it is something that it can't understand, right? You work every day in davening to bridge that gap. That's essentially your job in this world. That's why God created you. God created you in this world with a godly soul and an animal soul to bridge that gap. You take this animal soul, which can only understand and desire finite things, and you turn it towards the infinite reality of God. So it is from the animal soul that the evil inclination emerges. Hainu, that is, shehu malbish es hakeach hamisave. Listen to how he puts it. The evil inclination enclothes that inner desire, that inner wanting, b'tziyurim royim, with evil forms. Right? It gives an evil form to that desire. The animal soul says, I want, I want, I want. What's the evil inclination? The evil inclination says what you want is a cheeseburger. That's the evil inclination, right? The animal soul just says, I want, I want, I want. The evil inclination comes and says, what you want is something unkosher. It gives it evil bodily desires and evil traits. But the actual power of desire itself, in other words, headquarters, the guy behind the guy on your shoulder, right? The animal soul, is not essentially evil. Is not essentially evil. And by negating the form of its evil, right, by explaining to the animal that what you want now, what you wanted before was X, but you should really want Y, right? All you do is you change that garment, that outer layer, that superficial layer. Give it something else to want. You take away the cheeseburger and you give it a siddur or whatever it is, right? You can transform that inner desire to good. And to affect it. You can change it and transform it. And through it, you can give it positive forms and spiritual desires, right? Positive desires for what? For davening with a minyan, and by davening with intention, and by establishing times for Torah. All of this depends on the table. The table that you set in that little room that you're making for godliness. Was for a tish bayim is. What kind of table do you have? Right? You have to take the table. The table again is Psukei de Zimra and Birchas Kriyashma. You take this animal and you're changing out that form. That's essentially what you're doing. You're harnessing the power of the animal, the warmth and the passion of the animal for godliness. That's the second step. The first step was before you went to sleep, which again, you can't forget that one, because we're going to say it every class, and we'll continue saying it every class, because it's so important that if you think the day starts in the morning, you're so wrong. It's already lost if you try to start in the morning. You have to start from the night before. Right? The second step is davening up until the Shema. Davening up until the Shema is essentially you get the animal on board. You take an ox, you take a bull which is about to charge in the field, and you turn him into a steak that you can feed to your family. Something like that. V'hinei kisei hu kriya Shema. Next paragraph. The third step. The third step in the 4-step program. The third step is kisei, chair. Right? Chair was saying Shema. The last step, for those who can't remember, is menorah, is lamp, which is the Amidah, the standing silent prayer. Right? So the next step is the Shema. The next step is when we say the parts of the Torah, Shema and Baruch She'amar, in the 3 paragraphs. Right? Now we're going to have a long explanation, which I will try and do nicely in a way that can be easily understood. It's hard to do. It's hard to translate this sort of thing. The Chassidic Rebbes is going to do what he was doing earlier a little bit and explain the words of the Shema and what's really going on here. So I'll do the best I can. Let's read. The Parsha Rishon, the Kriya Shema, who Shema Yisrael, I think Pasuk Rishon, the Kriya Shema, who Shema Yisrael, Avay Elokeinu Avay Echad. The first verse of the Shema is I will translate it in the usual Siddur translation, and then we will find out how inadequate it is. It's Hear, O Israel. I don't know what hero is, but that's how it's usually translated, right? Hero in Hebrew is a gibor. I don't know what a hero, like a superhero. Hear, O Israel. Havaya Elokeinu. Hashem is our God. Havaya Echad. Hashem is one. That's the first verse, right? Translates the Chassidic Rebbe. Shema Yisrael. A Yid der Hert. Shema Yisrael, a Jew hears. Der Hert doesn't mean hear. Der Her is a very hard word to translate into English. There's Heren. The Chassidic Rebbe actually discusses this in a famous Sikha. There's Heren and Der Heren. Heren is to hear. Der Her is like hear, but really hear, like internalize, to take it in, to become one with the idea. Shema Yisrael means the Jew shouldn't just listen, he should hear, right? He should hear in a profound sense. A Yid der Hert, Shema Yisrael, a Jew hears, a Jew der Hers. As Havaya Elokeinu is Havaya Echad, that Hashem, our God, is Hashem the One. What does that mean? Well, Yisrael, Kayal Nefesh Elekishu, Chelek Elekamimal, Yisrael. What does the name Yisrael refer to? There's different names to refer to Jews, right? Yehudi, right? There's Yaakov, right? Jacob, the children of Jacob. Jacob was one of his names. And Israel is another one of his names. So our verse, Shema Yisrael, uses the word Yisrael. Right? Yisrael refers to Nefesh Elekishu Chelek Elekamimal, the godly soul, which is a part of God above. As the Alter Rebbe says in the beginning of the 2nd chapter of Tanya, the godly soul is a piece of God above, literally. That's what Yisrael means. Why is that what Yisrael means? The piece of God within each of us. Why? The Tevas Yisrael, who Yashar Keil. Yisrael, if you split it into 2 words, is Yashar, or Yud Shin Reish. Yashar means straight or upright, right? Kael is one of the names of God. Kael means God, Aleph Lamed. means God, like Kel Malei Rachamim, the famous prayer. Kale, name of God, not the vegetable from a salad. Kale, and one of the names of God, usually referring to God's kindness in Kabbalah. Chesed, it's the name of Chesed, kindness, right? So Yisrael means Yashar Kale, literally means straight God. But what does that mean? Or upright God. We'll translate, he'll explain more. The godly soul comes from this name of Hashem, Aleph Lamed, Kale. The Halamed, Hemamidas, the Nevejalikis. What is the Lamed, the letter Lamed? It is the emotive qualities of the godly soul. What I was just calling 5 minutes ago, the Yetzer Tov, right? The good inclination. The Besharshan, Him Gimel Bechinas Nehi. We're getting Kabbalistic. It's a pity Ronnie's not here. That in their source, they are the three levels called Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. Netzach, Hod, and Yesod are Spheres 7, 8, and 9 of the 10 godly attributes. Right? You have Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. How much to explain? We'll do it very, very briefly. Very, very briefly. Very briefly. You have 10... Kale is the name of God.
The last two.
At the end.
Aleph Lamed.
What's the question? Sorry?
The two last letters in the word is
Aleph Lamed, we don't pronounce it. We pronounce it with a ch because it's named Hashem.
It's a name of God. Yeah.
I say it's not pronounced.
No. No. Normally we would pronounce it like in the prayer, El Malei Rachamim. I'm saying Kale because I'm very religious.
But you know nothing about it.
I don't. So, it's a very unexamined life.
It's not
So,
it doesn't even define religion.
Yeah.
It's the same way we do.
you have the 10.
Very different.
You have the 10 divine traits, the 10 spheres, right? 3 of them are intellectual, 7 of them are what we call emotive, although those names are. Like all of these terms, it takes 30 years to figure out what those words even mean in this context, right? But you have 3 which are called the brains or the intellectual qualities. You have 7 which are called the emotive qualities, right? Really 6 are the emotive qualities. The 10th is a special... is the special 10th one, which is exceptional in various ways, although sometimes it's bundled with the emotive qualities, right? So, you have Chachma bin Adas, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, the three intellectual things, Chabad. Then you have the first 3 primary emotive qualities, which are Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, which are kindness, strength, and grace or beauty is different ways to translate it, right? Then you have Netzach, Hod, Yesod, which are the 3 we're talking about here. They're usually translated as victory, humility, and foundation. The translations are not useful, I'm very aware. And then you have the last one, which is called Malchus, which is called kingship or majesty, which is the special 10th Sphira. Right? But the 6 emotive qualities, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, are called Zah in Chassidus, which means Zer Anpin, the small faces. The reason they're called the small faces is because they derive from and reflect a level in the divine crown, Keser, called Arich Anpin, which is the long faces. Right? So the famous story is that Arich Anpin walks into the bar and Zer Anpin asks him why the long face. Right? Arich Anpin literally means the long faces, right? Zer Anpin means the small faces. And the reason for that is because, not for this class, their countenances, their faces is all very Kabbalistic concepts. But the 3 divine traits we're talking about here is Netzach, Hod, Yesod, which are the bottom 3 emotive traits. I would say of all of the 10 spheres, these are the 3 that we talk about the least. So it's interesting that they're here. Right, that's what we're discussing here. Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. Netzach, Hod, and Yesod are a lower external representation of Chesed, Gvura, and Tiferes, respectively. So again, you have... I didn't bring the whiteboard because I thought, why could I possibly need it? But I would actually like one right now. So you have Chesed, Gvura, and Tiferes. You have kindness, severity, and grace. And they're like this. I'll do it in reverse for you so that it's in the correct spaces for you. The famous drawing of the spheres. You have a left side, a right side, and a middle, right? So I'm doing this is reversed, so it's correct for you. It's wrong for me right now. I'm just explaining to you. You have Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, right? You have right side is kindness, left side severity, middle is the middle. Middle is Tiferes, beauty, grace, which is the middles are combinations of the two sides. The middle is very special because the middle is called the Mevriach Hatichon, Helech min hakatza lakatza. It's called the middle pole in the construction of the tabernacle. The middle pole in the wall wasn't broken up into sections. It ran the whole way through. The middle one is like the truth, right? It runs from the beginning to the end. The middle is very special. The middle row. Right? In general, special things happen in the middle row. The middle row is Keser, crown, Das, knowledge, Tiferes, beauty, Yesod, foundation, and Malchus are all those are the four middle ones. Those are the four middle things. So, yeah. So you have if you include Keser as the 11th Sphira, it's in the middle. What?
It's like bass player.
Keser is really just Keser, Malchus, it's the whole thing. We can't do this. Too much Kabbalah. So you have Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, yeah? Then below them, corresponding to each one of these, if you shift those three downwards, you have Netzach, Hod, Yesod. Right? Netzach, victory, is a lower expression of Chesed, kindness. You have humility, which is Hod, which is a lower expression of Gvura. Right, judgment, strength, fear, different ways to translate. And then you have Yesod, foundation, which is a lower expression of Tiferes. Right? On Erev Shabbos, when we read about the 10 different spheres, what we say on Erev Shabbos, each one of the different spheres corresponds to body parts. Okay? Let me go through them for you. Chachma, Bina. Chachma is brain. Bina there may be heart. I can't remember. Bina may be heart there. Bina is either another part of the brain or the heart, okay? Then, Chesed, I think Bina is the heart. Chesed, you have the right arm. Gvura, left arm, right? Tiferes, beauty, is the torso, okay? Netzach, right leg. Hod, left leg. Yesod is the bris, is the bris milah, right? The circumcision is the Yesod. Okay? And Malchus is the mouth, interestingly. Right? We discussed this in a different class. Malchus goes all the way, right? It seems to go in descending order through all the body parts down to the lowest part, and then Malchus is the mouth, which goes back to the head, but that's a mystery not for tonight. Okay? So that's Netzach, Hod, Yesod. So what the Frierdiker Rebbe is saying here is that the Lamed represents Netzach, Hod, Yesod. How Lamed, the Hebrew letter Lamed, represents these three spheres, we're going to talk about in a second, right? But first, he's going to describe these three spheres for a moment, okay? The Lamed, the Lamed is the emotive qualities of the godly soul. It's the little guy on the right shoulder who has the good voice, right? That's the Lamed. Where does he come from? What's his source in godliness? His source is Netzach, Hod, Yesod, those three lower spheres, right? Ukamei, what is it like? Metaphor. Havlad, it's like a fetus. Why is it like a fetus? The kshehu be'ibur, when the fetus is in the womb, hine reishe ben brachav, it lies in what is called the fetal position. Its head is between its knees. That's how the Frierdiker Rebbe describes it here. That's exactly what the godly soul is like. He's like a fetus with his head between his knees. That just like the fetus when it is in the womb, there is a time when the godly soul is also in the womb. There's a Kabbalistic concept called ibur, called the womb or pregnancy, right? This very, very deep and profound Kabbalistic concept that before things are manifest, there is a time that they need to cook. There's something like a spiritual pregnancy, right? Before something is manifest, it's in a spiritual state of pregnancy. It needs to grow in the spiritual womb before it expresses. Okay? There's a spiritual concept of the womb. The godly soul, when it is in the spiritual womb, right? Before it is drawn forth and enclosed within the body, before it is enclosed within the body. Okay? So what he's saying is that I don't really, to be honest with you, I don't really fully understand what this is talking about. The godly soul, he's saying I can tell you what it's saying. I can't tell you what it means. What it's saying is that the godly soul, before it comes into the body, right, which by the way is when? When does the godly soul come into the body?
13.
It's complicated.
13.
The answer is it's complicated. Some say it's a process. It's a long process. It's a long process. We say that the first step is the bris of a baby boy, right? A girl is from birth, and it completes at majority, at bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah, right? That's what we say. That the godly soul is really only fully present from the age of majority, which is part of the reason why that's the age which they're mechuyev in mitzvahs. That's the age when they have to start keeping the Torah.
So for a boy, why do they say it's like a wild donkey until it's 3 years old?
I don't know. It's a good question. Good question. To me, it doesn't seem to stop. I don't see. There's no upper limit. There's no upper limit. I don't understand that Torah.
And he speaks from personal experience.
It's the wild donkey.
So the godly soul, in its spiritual pregnancy, in the spiritual womb, before it comes into the body at whatever time we're describing, right? It's like a fetus in the womb. And when it's the fetus in the womb, its head is between its knees, right? In other words, the whole thing is compressed. What do you see from the outside? How does it express? In its pregnancy, what expresses is the netzach hod yesod, right? You look from the outside, you don't see the head or the heart. What you see is the legs and the place of the bris, right? That's the external part of the godly soul in the spiritual pregnancy. I told you I could say what it's saying. I don't know what it means though, okay? Why is this lamed? Why does this correspond to the letter lamed? Oh, it's quite simple, says the Chassidic Rebbes. Shaharehu tlas klilin goy tlas. Ve'ene misgale kiyim bebechinas nehi, ela shanehi atzman klulim gam kein me'eser. It is three included in three, and it's not revealed except through netzach hod yesod. Again, don't ask me what it means. But netzach hod yesod themselves are included from 10. In other words, each one of those three spheres, as we know when we count the Omer, right? Each of the spheres is included from all the other 10 spheres, right? So each of those three is included of 10. So that's the emotive qualities of the godly soul is 30, has a numerical value of 30 Kabbalistically. It's 10 for each one of Netzach hod yesod, because Netzach hod yesod is the root in the spiritual womb of the emotive qualities of the godly soul. I'm glad everyone followed.
The way the letter Lamed is made is actually from two vavs, and then there's a kind of a slide that actually takes from all the way up, down. Mm-hmm. That's how they describe, that the Lamed is made.
Sure. V'zeu ha-lamed. So that's the lamed, says the Chassidic Rebbe. Shehem ha-midos t'nefesh alikis. They are the emotive qualities of the godly soul. V'yeridas ha-neshama hu-letzerech aliyah. And why does that soul come into the body in the first place? It descends in order to ascend. Why does it come down here? So that it can go higher, spiritually closer to God. This is the ascent in the divine service of the godly soul here below by learning Torah and fulfilling mitzvahs maisias, and fulfilling the actions of mitzvahs, and through all of its behavior according to the Torah. V'hainu, which means by finding every worldly thing and transforming it into a vessel for godliness, as we were just discussing about the animal soul at length, right? The godly soul does that for everything it meets. That's its responsibility. That's its mission. Everything it meets, including the animal soul, which is what it spends most of its time working on, everything it meets, it should transform into a vessel for godliness. And this allows the godly soul to reach even higher and to be greater than it was before it came into the body, right? So it descends into the body in order to ascend spiritually. The descent is for the sake of an ascent. The Zeu Aleph, and that's the letter Aleph. Shehu hanesinas kech milamayla alavedas habirurim. The Aleph, which is, what's the numerical value of Aleph? 1, right? Aleph is the power given from above for the refinement of Edas Habirurim, the divine service through the refinement of all worldly things, right? This work of refining the good, finding the good and the godly in everything that it meets, right? It's given power for that from above. God gives it the ability to do this. That's the Aleph. The Aleph is the ability to do this. So to recap, you have the Lamed, which represents the positive emotional qualities of the godly soul. Then you have that's the Lamed. Then you have the Aleph, which is the power given by God to refine everything that it meets and turn everything it meets into a vessel for godliness. Shazeo inyan ha-hasba, masha masbiyan osei tehi tzadik, right? There's two ways to read this word, very famously. It's from the beginning of Tanya. Right at the beginning of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe says that they make the soul swear before it comes into the body that it will be righteous, right? Mashabiyan osei, from the language of shavua, which means an oath. They make the soul take an oath that it's going to be righteous. But the Tzemach Tzedek famously reads this phrase differently. He doesn't read it as a shin, he reads it as a sin. It's not mashbiyan, it's masbiyan, from the language of soiveya. Soiveya means satisfied, right? Masbiyan osei means that before, they don't swear it, make it take an oath that it's going to be righteous. They're masbiyan, they satisfy all of its requirements that it's going to need to be righteous in this world. In other words, it's not an obligation, it's the gifts that God gives to the soul that it's going to be able to fulfill its mission, is what masbiyan osei.
Is there ever a point in time where the soul has reached that pinnacle of...
No, there is no pinnacle. There is no pinnacle because it's movement toward God. God is infinite, right?
So when someone dies, and the soul elevates, that soul is not a perfect soul at that point.
No.
So what happens? Where's that soul floating around somewhere?
Absolutely, it goes to what's called Gan Eden. There's different levels of Gan Eden. Describe the length in Chassidus, the Garden of Eden, where it takes pleasure from its perception of God. And the more and more, the better and better it can understand and unite with godliness, the higher it is. So and there's no limits.
So when a baby is being born, which soul is now given to that baby?
Oh, it's a very good question. You're asking questions above my pay grade. I don't know.
Because the good souls are up there.
It's a very good question. I don't know.
You say Kaddish, you elevate the souls of your ancestors.
But the soul that came back into...
No, but the souls, while it's floating around up there, your good deeds on this earth elevate that soul.
So they give the soul the power. They give the soul its power to fulfill its mission in this world. Must be an oseti tzaddik. They give it the power to be righteous in this world. They fill it up. They satisfy it with potential, with powers. That it's able to refine and to transform and to make everything that it meets into a vessel for godliness. This is the light of the supernal chachma. This is the light of God's wisdom that it gives to that's what's given to the soul to give it the ability to fulfill this this mission. The copy's bad. What's that word? V'hakavanaba, the intention in it, I think, hu desechel eleki is kabel besechel ha'anushi. The intention is that the godly intellect should be received into the human intellect, that the human mind should comprehend the godly mind. That the human mind should be a vessel to understand godliness. V'hu inyan ha'alef. And that's why, so in other words, to recap, what's Aleph? Aleph is the potential that God gives to the soul to do its work of refinement here in this world. That work of refinement is intellectual. It's fundamentally an intellectual work by nature. Although it appears that you're wrapping tefillin with your hand and thereby making a vessel of physical leather into a vessel, if something of physical leather into a vessel for godliness, right? Really the work is all intellectual. It's an intellectual aveda. You are taking human intellect, finite intellect, and you are allowing the finite intellect to understand godliness. Now, in some levels, this is more obvious when you're doing it with the animal soul, like we were saying before, right? You have to help the animal soul wants only the things that it can understand, right? You have to turn it towards the infinite, the things that it naturally does not comprehend, right? So that's the obvious way that this is true. But in a more subtle way, this is true in all of our Aveda, in all of the refinement we do in the world, because everything has a finite nature defined by rational intellect, right? In other words, the human intellect is what can tell me exactly what this cup is in finite terms. It tells me the space it occupies, the properties it has, how it's manufactured, what it's made of, what color is it, why does that color appear that color. Everything the human intellect can tell me about this cup, right? The godly soul's end, the godly soul's purpose that it's given power to do from above, with the Aleph, its power is to turn all of those details, all of that finite reality defining this cup, into a vessel for the divine intellect, which is the way God sees the cup, right? Which is totally different. Totally different than the way we see the cup, as we should all know from learning Shara Yichud Va'emunah, right? As we should all know from when we were learning Tanya a few weeks ago, right? That the way God sees this cup and the divine reality of this cup is very different than our finite, all our finite and human definitions. The godly soul is to bring those two definitions into alignment, right? It takes this finite thing and it reveals the divine truth of that thing. And it's not an intellectual explanation necessarily. It's often through action. Most mitzvahs are through action. But by putting the coin in the tzedakah box, that is actually at a spiritual level what you are doing. You are aligning the finite definition of the thing with the godly definition of the thing. This is the different. This is the one of the ways of explaining what the real tikkun olam is. Right? Accept no substitutes. There's no. It has nothing to do. Well, not nothing, but it has very little to do with environmentalism, saving the whales, anti-nuclear weapon proliferation, right? Tikkun olam, the fixing of the world. The fixing of the world means that you take the finite reality of each thing in the world and you reveal the godly sparks, in the words of the Arizal, the nitzutzos, the sparks of a godliness within it, which is this process we are discussing, right? That's what it means to fix the world. Just a note. The power to do all of this is called Aleph.
Send that memo around.
I know. We've been trying. It hasn't worked. Hasn't taken. It's not as exciting. It's less exciting. It's less exciting. You mean putting on the tefillin? But that's so un-Jewish, right?
Un-Jewish.
Yeah. Well, that's what some people say. This is Aleph. This is Aleph. This is Aleph. Why is this Aleph, right? So having said all that, we understand why this is the letter Aleph. It's obvious, right? Because Sheu Inyan Elpecha Chachma. Aleph means, it's like from the same root as Ulpan. Ulpan, right? What's Ulpan?
Learn.
Yeah, Ulpan is where you go to learn, right? It's a school. It's a crash course. So too, the Aleph. What's Aleph? Aleph is Elpecha Chachma. I will teach you wisdom. Aleph means to teach. Elfa Bina, I will teach you understanding. These are the mind of the godly soul, which gives life to its emotive traits, and it expands upon and broadens the emotive traits of the godly soul, into a complex partzuf. Partzuf literally means a face. Right, into a complex arrangement. It takes something which is simple in the sense of not made up of parts, right? It takes something which is simple, one thing, and it broadens it into a complex form. I have an inkling of what this means. We're not going to discuss it. So so again, Kale, this is the second half of the word Yisrael that we've spent all this time explaining, just remember. The second half of the word. You have the Lamed, the emotive traits of the godly soul, which means the good voice on the shoulder. Again, the little guy on the shoulder. That's the Lamed. What's the Aleph? The Aleph is the godly wisdom which informs the little guy on the shoulder. Right? It's the intellectual revelation, the divine wisdom, right, which takes that little inclination to good and gives him depth and gives him meaning and gives him strength so that he can do his job, which is to transform human intellect into a vessel for godly intellect.
So when we say, bottom line is we're saying Shema, we're speaking to ourselves.
Yes, but we haven't even done the first word yet. Never mind the second word yet. Never mind the whole sentence, right?
But Israel is us.
Yes.
Individually.
Yeah. Here Jew, right? A Yid der Hert.
No, that's not what he said. We spent the last 30 minutes saying you're speaking to your godly soul.
The Aleph and the Lamed, right? Let's continue just a little bit further. I know we're over time. V'zeu nikra Kel. This is why the godly soul is called by the name Kel, which is really a godly name. Why is it called Kel? Aleph Lamed, right? Shehem hamochin v'hamidos nefesh elikis. Because as we just explained so clearly, right, with a lot of Kabbalah, that the Aleph and the Lamed are the mind and the emotions of the godly soul. That's what Aleph and Lamed are, as we just explained, right? The Lamed is the emotions. The Aleph is the mind of the godly soul. So what's the Yashar Kel hi aveda ha'elikis kameshi al pi Torah. What's the Yashar Kel then? Right, with the first three letters, it is the divine service according to the Torah. And according to the will, the divine will, with the fulfilling the purpose of the creation and the bringing into being of the world. Why? So you have Aleph Lamed, the last two letters, is the mind and the heart of the godly soul. Yashar, with the first three letters, Yashar Kel means the divine service, the godly soul fulfilling God's will in this world, right? And the purpose for which the world is created. Why? The Hine Ksiv, because as the verse says, Kahel Zayin, Ecclesiastes is my favorite, Levad ra ze matzasi asher asa lekimes adam Yashar. Vehema bakshu cheshbenes rabin. Do we have a Tanakh? Yes. Oh, thank you. I made a mess. Thank you very much. All right. Ezekiel, Obadiah. I have to give you this in the correct translation. Says King Solomon, he says, "But see, this I did find. God has made man simple, but they sought many intrigues." Again, "But see, this I did find. God has made man simple, but they sought many intrigues." Right? Simple is the word yashar here. He's translating yashar as simple. Right? God made man simple. The Hema Bakshu Cheshbenes Rabin. They sought out many intrigues. They complicated things. God made human beings simple. They sought out many things and complicated this existence, many intrigues. Right? What does this mean? Says the Chassidic Rebbes, Asher Asa Elikim Es Adam Yashar, that God made man simple or straightforward. What is man? Adam refers to the godly soul. Godly soul is called Adam. The nefesh habahamis nikra behema, because the animal soul is the animal, right? So who's the man? The man is the godly soul. The nefesh halikis nikra Adam. Ve'elekim asa es ha'adam yashar. God made man simple, straightforward. Be'etzem. Hu b'madregas yashar, that the godly soul is essentially simple and straightforward. Or kamasher kasov la'asos es hayashar be'enei Hashem aleikecha shehu hayosher d'Torah mitzvahs, to do what is upright in the eyes of Hashem your God. This is the uprightness, the forthrightness of Torah and mitzvahs. V'hema bakshu cheshbenes rabim. So what does it mean? They requested many intrigues, right? The kasher nasim hema pirushem nasim shtayim. Oh man. All right. 1 second. So let's pause here. I don't want to overly confuse things too fast. I know we're over 3 more minutes. Apologies to everyone. So let's just take a step back first.
Put the word up again.
Yeah. Yeah. Yashar Kale.
Yashar Kale.
Yeah.
The reason you said
Aleph and Lamed is the mind and the heart. Aleph and Lamed is the mind and the heart of the godly soul. Yashar means simple or straightforward, right? So the Chassidic Rebbes is now explaining the term straightforward or simple, right? So he has this quote from Koheles, from Ecclesiastes. Man was created simple, but he requested many intrigues, right? Which Koheles, in the Pshat, in the simple reading, is talking about, I assume, human beings in general, right? Chassidus, the Chassidic Rebbe, is reading this verse totally different. This verse is not talking about human beings in general. It's talking about the godly soul. The godly soul is fundamentally created straightforward. Meaning what? Meaning it's created desiring Torah and mitzvahs. It wants to do what's forthright by God, which is the right thing to do. That is learning Torah, doing mitzvahs, serving God in this world.
Is it
right?
your own or everyone's godly soul?
The godly soul.
Which means what?
The godly soul.
So anyone, like, because when you say Shema, you say it loudly. You don't say it like undertone. The other one is that is an undertone.
Yeah.
When you say Shema, you say it loudly. So
I'm not sure I follow. Every Jew has a godly soul.
Right, but when you say it loudly, it doesn't
And
necessarily...
the truth is that all the godly souls are one with each other. So I'm not even sure if the question's a question.
So that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That, I mean, it's not really your own. It's your own as a part of everyone else.
I'm not sure there's a distinction, right? Your own is the same as everyone else's own. It's all one thing, right? As difficult as it may be to remember it in the synagogue.
if you say Hero Israel to a group, I mean, when we say the prayer,
Yeah.
then we're thinking that we're part of a collective body.
Right, saying Hero Israel, the people of Israel.
Yes.
That's not what the Chassidic Rebbe is saying.
Okay.
He's saying Hero Israel, meaning Israel's the godly soul. He's saying, listen Jew, in the singular. The Chassidic Rebbe says, a Yid der hert, a Jew hears, right? A Jew hears. He's not saying specifically a single individual, I don't think. He's saying a Jew. A Jew is both a general archetype and the individual, and there's no separating between the two, I think, right? Would to me seem the logical way of thinking about this. The Jew is both a concept, but it's a concept that indwells in a person, and each and every person is a godly soul, right? Every person is a Jew by dint of partaking in the Jew, if you understand what I'm saying, right? There's one godly soul, but everyone has a copy, right? Everyone has that godly soul, but in them it's one.
But is it the same? Everyone has the same godly soul or different godly soul?
Oh, that's a very good question. I can't deal with that question now. Complicated. Good question, complicated answer. Good question, complicated answer. Good question. I don't know about that. I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know. The verse, the Chassidic Rebbe is pointing out like this. The verse says, God creates man yashar. He creates him simple, forthright, which means in what's forthright for a Jew? What's forthright in Torah? Fulfilling Torah and mitzvahs, fulfilling the word of God, right? The Chassidic Rebbe is medayek. He makes a precise reading of this verse because the first half of the verse is in the singular. This actually somehow directly ties into exactly what you guys are arguing about. It ties because the first half of the verse is in the singular, right? It says, again, Asher asa Elokim es ha'adam, God made the man, literally, yasher, straightforward, right? Vehema, but they, right, have sought many intrigues. He created the man, singular, forthright, desiring to fulfill the will of God. But they, vehema, have sought many intrigues. So the Chassidic Rebbe says, very beautifully, vehema, bakshu chesbenish rabim, they sought many intrigues. The kasher nasim hema, when they become the plural form. I don't understand how this ties in so well with what you guys are arguing about. It's actually a literal hashgacha pratis. It was literal divine providence. Because what you guys were arguing about had nothing to do with my class until now. Until now, it had nothing to do. Yeah.
It says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God."
Yeah, Elokeinu is ours. Yeah.
Okay, so the implication is that there's a group involved.
Right.
Whereas you're saying
In that word, yes.
yeah, well, in that sense.
Oh, not me. The Chassidic Rebbe is saying. listen, when they become plural, Hema, Pirushem Nasim Shtayim. Now there's two people in the verse, right? Now there's two people in the verse. Vahainu, that is, B'yeridas hanashama beguf. When does it become multiple? When the soul descends into the body. That the godly soul is enclosed in the animal soul. The godly soul is put in with that animal soul that each of us have. V'heim shtayim. Now there's two. As, what happens then? Then they seek out many intrigues, many calculations. V'hainu, pizur hanefesh berabais machshavais haterdes umababelos oisem avedes Hashem yizbarech. The soul is spread out with many thoughts which bother it and confuse it from serving God. And with speech and actions that are not for God. Right? Yashar, God creates the godly soul. All it wants to do is Torah and mitzvahs. Right? That's the man, singular. The godly soul, singular, is the godly soul before it comes into the body. Right? That is Yashar Kel. It's Yashar, it's forthright, it wants to do the will of God. What wants to do the will of God? The Aleph, the mind of the godly soul, and the Lamed, the emotions of the godly soul. Right? They all just are Yashar and want to do the God, serve God. Right? That's Yisrael. What's a Yisrael? What's a Jew? It's a Yashar Aleph Lamed. It wants to do the will of God with its godly mind and its godly heart, its godly emotions. That's what a Jew is. That's what a Yisrael is, right? Vehema, but when they become plural, when the Jew is no longer a singular being, but a dualistic being, when he gains his second half, the godly soul comes in and now it has to deal with the animal soul, then they seek out many intrigues. Then the godly soul becomes all distracted and lost with all of these different... it's dragged into all of the things the animal wants, which is the many calculations, the many intrigues, all of its many and various interests. We will continue, God willing, next week.
God. So, one of the things that...
We've only explained one word of the Shema. We'll get to the rest of the words next week, God willing.